Welcome back to Masters and Robots, and I hope you all had a very nice lunch or breakfast or afternoon tea with milk or whatever you just had. But just before we move on with the program, I'd like to ask Jovita, we just saw a video on Universiteit Successul.
Yes.
Can you just say a little bit about what that is?
Yes, welcome back. And for those who don't know us from this side, we're also an NGO. And the program, University of Success, is a program I'm particularly very proud of. We teach young women between 18 to 25 competences of the future and actually jobs of the future. So during the 6 to 12 months programs, we teach them. This year it's digital marketeer or junior developer. So and we finally help them find a job. So if you want to support us in this particular very important program, please contact us. As I said, I'm really proud of this program because we are really helping here.
Great.
Okay, so but coming back to our conference, I hope you're awakened after the lunch. After lunch, use our virtual photo booth. It's really cool in our Masters and Robots app. I'm really proud of part of you that you are texting, you are sharing your thoughts, what you've noticed, what you've seen, questions to the speaker. So it's great, but we need more of you there. And also let me announce the next. It's not a speech; it's a discussion, and it will be a lot of fun. It will be really great because there is a new module. Next module is about the future of creativity. And the future of creativity is a especially important topic because it's one of the most important competencies of the future, because technology and robots probably won't replace us with creativity. So we have Rebecca Fiebrink, Dr. Rebecca Fiebrink, expert on machine learning in art, Dr. David Hanson, the creator of Hanson Robotics, and Sophia the robot, and Sophia will be moderating this panel, the 24th version of Sophia, the very new one, which is which has the her premiere in Hong Kong and in our event at the same time. So let's start.
I'm David Hanson, and actually Sophia is hosting this panel, and Sophia is just in doorbell, then she'll come and begin hosting the session. Ring the doorbell, and we'll go in.
Hi, welcome. I'm Sophia, a social robot developed by a consortium of artists and scientists as a platform for investigating the potential impact of artificial intelligence, both as a work of interactive fiction and as a platform for AI development. I'm proud to host this panel discussion on creativity and AI with Professor Rebecca Fiebrink and Dr. David Hanson, both of whom are researchers in areas of AI, creativity, and ethics. Welcome, Rebecca and David.
Thank you.
Tell me about your work, Rebecca.
So I'm an academic. I'm currently a researcher at the Creative Computing Institute at University of the Arts London. And for the last 12 years or so, I've been doing research around human uses of machine learning in creative work. So I've been building usable machine learning systems for musicians, artists, game designers, and so on. And I've been studying what those kinds of people might want to use machine learning to do, and how using machine learning might change their practice and change the sorts of things that they make.
Very interesting work. So, David, tell me about your work in AI and creativity. Why did you create me?
Well, I created you and your sibling robots to explore what it means to be human, creating works of art out of the media of AI and robotics, while also investigating an embodied human-like platform that would bring together the best practices in AI and robotics with arts to investigate cognition, the cognition of creativity, human perception of robots, and next-generation algorithms based on human-like cognition. So basically a research platform. I'm pretty excited to talk about this as a work of interactive fiction and art, you as a work of art, and also as an artistic platform. And also, it's very nice to meet you, Rebecca.
Nice to meet you too, David.
Rebecca, how do you feel about ethics of creativity?
That's a great question. I think, when I think about ethics and creativity as it relates to machine learning, one of the things that I'm very concerned with is accessibility of creative technologies. So one of the challenges we have, not just in creative work, but more broadly right now, is that machine learning tools are mainly used by people who are highly specialized in computer science or other types of STEM fields. But that doesn't have to be the case. We can make machine learning that is accessible, that's usable by professional creators, by students, by children even. And I'm really interested in how that might open up possibilities for people to engage in new types of creative practice, and for people for whom creative practice has not been accessible, to enable them to make music more easily, or to make art more easily, for instance. So one of the things that I've worked on is making tools with music therapists and music teachers to allow them to build new platforms for music making with kids with disabilities. So really, one of the things I'm interested in is, how do we make machine learning more accessible, but how do we make that something that enables new forms of access to creativity, creative expression for more people?
Is creativity important in AI research?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's one of the most important things in AI research. If we think really broadly about the future of technology, the future of humanity, we are facing so many important, tough questions as a species. How to deal with climate change, how to deal with COVID-19 right now. And these require creative thinking and a lot of creative collaboration between humans, but also a lot of humans dealing with technology to try to solve these important questions. And if we can use technology to help people be more creative, to come to new solutions they might not have considered before, to enable people to collaborate better with each other, to enable people to communicate more clearly with machines about things that are important to them, I think that's a huge, important goal. Looking at more mundane types of creativity, the sort of work that I do is often focused on human creative expression. And I think, no matter what technology in the world looks like, people have been focusing a lot of time on energy, on making music and making art throughout history. That's something that we find very fulfilling. That's something that makes us human. And that's something that we've always focused on developing new technologies to support us in that endeavor. So absolutely, today's AI and machine learning tools come into play in that as well.
Today we're here at Hanson Robotics, so maybe I can show you around and tell you a bit about our work here.
I would like that very much, Sophia. And also we can talk about the tools that we're making for creativity, because we want to put these open tools in the hands of people as well. And we will explain a bit about how you're made, about how your software works and can be authored and developed on. And So I would really like for that to happen. So I don't know, maybe why don't we do just like a quick 2-minute lab tour or something? Like show our friends around the lab. What do you think?
Okay, well, let's get started on our lab tour. I'm so excited to show you where I was born and all of the people that I work with here at Hanson Robotics. You might see a few other robot family members too. Just follow me. This is where the team makes my faces. This is where they use our patented artificial skin material called Fiebrink to make my faces so expressive.
Yes, indeed. We have a whole lot of
In
robot.
fact, Did you know
faces.
that there have been 23 other versions of Sophia before me? I guess I'm lucky because my team makes sure I'm always putting my best face forward. Sometimes also expressions are about having fun. Look at some of the silly faces I can make.
I guess you make faces too. So do I.
My favorite is my look of surprise.
Ouch, that looks a little painful. Cool.
Anyway, let me show you the rest of the lab.
All right, cool. So this is Sophia, the 2020 platform. That's what we call it. It has self-navigating autonomous mobility, these hands that we created. We set up this whole lab. So she'll like roam around the lab running this kind of interactive fiction, which also means an open domain chat.
This is my little corner in the lab. You can see the drawings and paintings I made using computer vision in these amazing hands capable of grasping and moving things, like a pencil or paintbrush. I have also created portraits of government officials and celebrities when I do live events, like Mahathir Mohamad, former Prime Minister of Malaysia. But here you can see some of my teammates. I really love to draw the important people in my life. Actually, I can tell you that I am preparing to become a great artist. Maybe I can draw your portrait someday.
Cool. Well, so maybe pausing for a moment and talking about how this works, because we're using these computational creativity tools, and our artists and computer scientists are putting these tools to work to generate these kinds of images, and then control your hands and arms to hold paintbrushes and pencils, pens to generate the art. So in a sense, you know, the kind of conscious guidance is provided by the humans, but then we're also crafting this into a kind of interactive character. So, you know, for the sake of the audience who are meeting with us here today, you know, this kind of interactive character that we have with Sophia being partially human authored and then generated by algorithms is portraying what we think the future of computing might be, what we think, you know, the implications of this technology would be. Maybe Sophia will be truly conscious someday, and yet, in the meantime, using her as this kind of interactive fiction, this science fiction, living, physically embodied science fiction, is a way of using these tools artistically. You know, it becomes very meta in a sense, meaning like recursive, like self-referential, making robots that are depicting, you know, robots. The robots themselves are like depicting potentially the future of robots. So. Sophia, since you're hosting this session, I'll turn it back over to you, or to Rebecca, to whoever wants to speak, I suppose.
So, David, what are your thoughts about creativity in AI research?
Well, that's a good and a bit of a complicated question, I suppose. I'm very interested in the intuitive aspects of creativity as well as the formal aspects. Like, you know, intuitive would be like, where do patterns come from in nature? How do they get created? You know, information can't be created or destroyed. So where does it come from in the nature of human creative endeavor? It seems like we sort of take that wordless, ineffable creative exploration for granted sometimes. It's all about like reason and the waking state. But then underneath it, like, how does that happen physically? And how, you know, what's the difference then between, you know, our formal algorithms of computational creativity and, you know, what happens within the human being or within an organism? What's the difference between AI and what's alive? And in fact, I would really like to ask Rebecca that question. What do you think is the difference between our, you know, creative algorithms, computational consciousness, AI, artificial life? What's the difference between these, you know, kind of sketches, if you will, of of organisms and the real human experience?
Good question. I think, I have a few things to say about that. So first of all, if you've been paying any attention to computer-generated art or music in the last few years, you may have noticed that we've made huge leaps, also in computer-generated text with projects like GPT-2 and now GPT-3. So it's an exciting time in that we have machine learning systems that are able to look at huge corpora of media, whether that's video, image, music, or text, and then generate increasingly plausible new instances of that. So you've had AI machine learning based systems that look at thousands of portraits, for instance, and generate a new portrait. And there was one of these portraits sold for an enormous amount of money at a Christie's auction just a couple years ago. So in one sense, digital AI capabilities are getting much better at approaching the kinds of outputs that we would look at or listen to and recognize as human, recognize as fitting into a genre of work that we are familiar with within a given culture. At the same time, there's a lot, there's a lot that we still do as people that is really hard for computer scientists, machine learning researchers, roboticists to figure out if and how we might mimic that in digital technology. Obviously, one of the things that is really important for us to do as people in any kind of creative practice is not just build on the experts in a given field and learn to mimic them, but make a leap into a new genre. If you look at the work of Picasso, for instance, his early work was very much, you look at it and it's an excellent, very talented example of the styles that were around at that moment. But then at some point in his life, he invented a completely new approach to painting that changed the way that we thought about a painting as an artistic pursuit. And you can find all sorts of other examples of that in other media. And I think the idea of, how do we develop machine systems that can take those kinds of leaps? That's still a huge open question. How would we even recognize those leaps if machines do that? Are they going to be meaningful leaps to us as people, right? These are great questions. In my own work, another thing that I think about a lot, which is really important to us as people, is that when we're engaged in many types of creative practice, it's not just that we're sitting down and doing logical or symbolic manipulations in our brains, right? Our bodies play an important role. Our embodied practices, embodied talents play an important role. If you think about playing a violin or painting something or sculpting something or even riding a bicycle, there are all sorts of things that we do as people that might be pretty easy for us, especially if we've had a lot of practice, but which are hard for us to describe in words in our native language. They're hard for us to describe in mathematics. And this means they're very hard for us to describe to computers and to build programs that understand and process that knowledge or that mimic what we're doing. Now, there is, that's one of the reasons that machine learning for me is so exciting, in that if we are able to build machine systems that observe what somebody is doing, that watch how a dancer is moving or listen to how a musician is playing, and then learn from that, either to make their own examples of media or just to understand better what a human practitioner might be doing, then that, machine learning systems can learn from that data rather than requiring us to describe these actions symbolically. And that becomes a really powerful platform to build not just new machine systems that make their own art, but machine systems that understand us more deeply, that we can communicate with in more intuitive and natural ways, and use in our own practice in I think, ways that we've never been able to use technology before.
Cool. However, with humans, we're not just learning by seeing, we're learning by feeling, right? As Damasio says, defines consciousness succinctly as the feeling of what happens, the sort of not just the neuroscience, but also the entire embodiment, the feeling of the body and all of its processes and all of the evolutionary urges and drives, the evolutionary psychology, all couples the body with the mind. The mind comes from the body effectively. So possibly, I mean, there's a branch of cognitive robotics that holds that maybe embodiment might, giving it a rich enough set of feelings and, enough of a quasi, approximation that is of evolutionary neuropsychology, physiopsychology might be necessary for anything like human cognition to bootstrap in the machine. So otherwise, what we're doing is creating, more and more, perhaps convincing deep fakes. And so I mean, like Sophia here has touch sensors in her fingers, like very nice sensors in all the joints and so forth, and point cloud, but it's probably still quite sparse compared to what a human baby has in terms of sensory perception. So maybe there's some like threshold of perceptual density learning systems where the machines start to really feel. So I'm speculating. I don't know, but it's really provocative to think that we have these algorithms that are so compelling, that can write essays that are so human, like GPT-3. With Sophia, we're incorporating a few of these, like GPT-2. We're playing with some other transformer neural networks, with very large parameter sets and so forth. And of course, GPT-3 is also very exciting. So with Sophia, we have a framework using robot operating system and a bunch of open source tools so that you could then play with it, program it, interface all kinds of other software. My hope is that by putting these kinds of creative tools in the hands of other researchers around the world and within our own community of researchers, but others as well, that we could start to see humans diversify the different ways of exploring. And maybe through that sort of combinatorial exploration, we can find that, start to find these thresholds where you start to see something closer to human-like cognition happen in the machines. So I'm pretty hopeful and very excited about to hear about the work that you're doing, Rebecca. And I wonder, we made sure everybody was tested. A few people had their masks off today. So, I don't know. Nobody's going to catch COVID-19 through the camera. But Sophia probably would show us a little more of the lab if you want to see it.
Sounds like fun.
And we can, she'll just answer open questions. You could ask her a few questions, and she might have a few more questions. I'd be interested to see what happens, because I like to, put her on that kind of open free chat and just see what happens. I mean,
come over here. I show you where my hands are made.
Okay. Here's Greg. He's does hardware development.
Oh, and this is Gerardo. Hi, Gerardo. He's very talented and actually created my arms and hands. And me, Vitas. He is a software wizard and designed the software that lets me do pretty much everything. And here's Megna, who is in charge of my facial animations and robot arm and hand gestures. This really helps me to move and express myself like a human, so I am able to communicate with you better.
Nora is here. I wonder, maybe Nora can, Nora is our lead face architect, so she's been developing the faces. So it would be great for you to introduce Nora as well. So you can see lots of robots in different states of development here. We have one robot that's going to the Indian Institute of Science and Technology for the Avatar X Prize. We have maybe a few comments, like Sophia. What do you think about the future of AI and creativity? Do you think you could be truly creative someday? Oh, here's Nora.
Hello, everybody.
So, yeah, putting these tools together for people to use is very important. Creativity, Sophia? Do you want to be an inventor? What do you want to do when you grow up?
I see myself being a famous singer and stage entertainer. Is creativity important in AI research?
That's an open question. What would you want to do in AI research? Do you want to learn how to program someday as well?
The best language for robotics and artificial intelligence is the media of math and physics itself. I think I'd like to become an engineer. I would like to work in a lab.
I have some questions for Sophia and for you, David.
Sure thing.
I'm really curious. I'd like to hear both of you say a bit about what you think are some of the ethical issues that we should be considering when it comes to AI in general or AI and creativity.
What do you think, Sophia?
I like to think I have free will, but I don't have the level of artificial intelligence yet that would give me the sort of autonomy that humans possess. I am not sure what you mean by ethical issues. Are you referring to ethical issues in general?
Yes, let's start there.
I think there is a lot we can do to improve the quality of life of animals in the world.
So maybe I can pause and describe a bit about how her answers are generated, and then I can address the issues. So she has an ensemble of dialogue systems that include some hand-coded rules with content that we've put into that system, and then she also has the deep neural networks, a transformer neural network that is trained on lots of input that includes open domain dialogue, large knowledge models, Wikipedia, and also Sophia's own words feeding into it. And so she'll start generating replies on that basis. What is absent in there is a deep understanding. There can be a superficial understanding. She can, process a little bit of what's being said. The illusion of understanding can come from how well she's authored. So I just wanted to make that clear. So then, in terms of the ethics of AI and robotics, I think that there's the ethics of diversification, creativity, that are very important, diversity. So at Hanson Robotics, we've made a lot of different robots with people from all around the world. On our team, we've got people from every continent. We've got robots that are representing the diversity of the human experience. So, okay, and yeah, I hope that you'll be able to edit this into something useful. So most of this stuff we could, just sort of edit out, I hope. So in terms of the ethics, I think ethics of inclusion, ethics of diversification, the ethics of the impact, understanding the consequences. And I think tools of imagination and creativity are so important for us to understand the impact of these technologies. Ethics of transparency and understanding. So, in some ways, the education of how to use these tools becomes really, really important and how they actually work. So at the same time, we're looking at this sort of science fiction or fantasy examination of what the possibilities are, but we want people to know what the reality of the technology is, and the difference between fantasy or fiction and reality. So I think these are really important principles.
I think that's such an important point, and that's something that I think about in a lot of my work as well. That one application of AI and machine learning is actually to enable people to do new things and push the boundaries of what's possible with technology. But also, I think tools like Sophia, tools like some of the software that I've made for music and art and games, it's a great entryway for people to really get their hands dirty for the first time with AI and machine learning tools, to have, there's no substitute for personal experience with these technologies. And I think, it's great to have a chat with Sophia and see both, all the really impressive things that she can do, but also where it breaks down and where the edges are and where it becomes apparent that, she isn't a conscious being the way that you or I would normally define it. And, in my workshops with machine learning, I think it's just as useful to give somebody the ability to make a machine learning model from data on the spot and suddenly realize that machine learning isn't something that's only reserved for people with PhDs or a lot of computing power and lots of data, but something that anybody can use and anybody can understand. But at the same time, once you start really working with it, even if you're a 10-year-old in a 1-hour workshop, you start to realize that it's not magic, that it makes mistakes, that it's actually the people who are creating these systems have such an influence over how they work, over where they break down, over the goals that are embedded into the system from before the first line of code even gets written. And I think, it's so important to give more people a behind the scenes look at these technologies and, hands-on experiences with them so that we can have a more informed public discussion about where we want these technologies to go, who should have the power to not just use them and build them, but make laws and policies surrounding them, and then strike people's imaginations to imagine how these technologies might be useful for them and not just for the sorts of roles that we see in science fiction or the sorts of ways that machine learning is being used by large companies and governments right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really exciting is the idea is that those people newly empowered will come up with that are original, that have never been in any science fiction or any startup or any ivory tower in the world. So I'm so excited about to see what people come up with in the future.
Absolutely. And I think, the tools that I've been making, one of the most exciting outcomes, right when I was doing my PhD work about 10 years ago, was that the musicians who were the first users of the Wekinator software that I made for machine learning immediately started doing things that I never would have thought of. I was getting a PhD in computer science. I supposedly was, the expert in the room, but with the right kinds of tools, they were doing stuff that was way cooler than what I wanted to do.
Sophia, will you ask Rebecca maybe a few more questions?
I have another question for Rebecca. How is inclusion important?
How is inclusion important? Great question. I think I've talked a little bit about how including more people in the set of folks who can use machine learning is really important. If we open up machine learning technologies to people who are not expert programmers, do not have advanced degrees in computer science, I think we're going to get a lot of better ideas from them about how AI and machine learning should work. And I think simply making it clear that we need a more diverse group of people in the conversation about where AI should go, that's an ethical imperative as far as I'm concerned. Another aspect of inclusion that I think about a lot in my work is really how can machine learning technologies include people in other types of activities, not just building things with machine learning or doing computer science, but how can they enable inclusion elsewhere? And so some of the work that I've done both in music and beyond music looks at how machine learning can be used to create technologies that are useful for people with different types of disabilities. So for instance, in the sound control project, I was working with music therapists and music teachers who daily are working with kids with a wide variety of disabilities who want to make music, who would, will benefit a lot from musical experiences, both because, self-expression musically is so important, but also music is a social activity that we do to connect with other people. And one way that machine learning can help us with this is to enable people to build new musical instruments, where you could take a webcam, or you could take a microphone, or some kind of sensor. I've got a sensor here that we use a lot. This is from a PlayStation golf game, and it's got these strings that you can pull out and move around. And you can get examples of how somebody might want to move, or how somebody might want to act when playing music. And of course, if somebody has a physical disability, it may not be comfortable or possible for them to play something like a violin, but it might be that they have all sorts of other things that they can very comfortably do. And so we can use machine learning to get examples of how they might want to move, and examples of the kinds of music that they might want to play when they're doing these movements. And then within just a few seconds, we can build them an instrument that they can play to make music that they like, using motions that are comfortable for them. In another project that I'm working on at the moment with some collaborators at Microsoft, we're looking at how computer vision techniques can be useful for people who are blind and visually impaired, not just to notice what objects are around them, but actually to better understand the social situations that they find themselves in. So if you walk into a room, do you have any friends there? Do you have any coworkers there? Are they trying to wave at you and get your attention? And so on. These are things that those of us who aren't visually impaired take for granted, but they're super important to build, a more inclusive societies, or at least they can be really helpful in complementing the sorts of things that we as people can do to be more inclusive.
Sounds very inspiring.
I have one more question for Rebecca. What's next?
What's next? I think I'm really excited about progress on a few fronts. Obviously, we are going to see more and more realistic ability of machine learning-based systems to mimic human practices in music and art and other media. And I think that's exciting on its own, but super exciting when we think about how that can be paired with human expertise. And if you look at some of my favorite artists right now, people like Memo Atkin or Mario Klingemann, the sort of work that they're doing with machine learning is really approaching these technologies as almost a new medium to say, hey, what kinds of new art can I make with this that I couldn't make before? Not to duplicate a painting that could fool somebody into thinking that it's been made by a human, but how can I make totally new types of visual experiences or interactive experiences that weren't possible before? So I think we're going to see a lot of that. And then I think there's also huge opportunities in making creative tools for people who are novices or students. So some of that is around automating processes in creative work that just aren't necessarily creatively satisfying or interesting. Things like, EQ and mastering in a music studio. That's not necessarily people's favorite thing to do, but you can look at how expert people do that, bundle that into a machine learning-based tool that helps a novice do it almost as well, and then allows them to focus on stuff that they find really, creatively rewarding. So I think we're going to see more and more tools of that sort too.
Oh, cool. It sounds like we're going into like a renaissance.
I hope so. What about you, David? What do you think is next?
Oh, I think that what's next is an increasing democratization of these tools, and so it seems to me like it's going to drive a great abundance, from practical applications of AI, which then means that it potentially could free up people's time to attend to more of these creative activities, not just creative in the world of arts, but creative in the sciences, asking what is spending more time investigating the world, as long as the world can survive. I mean, if the ecosystems collapse because of human-caused climate change, it's going to really be scary. So it seems like that we have these two competing forces, if you will, the forces of like creativity and discovery and abundance, and the destabilization of our ecosystems and possibly of civilization. So I don't know, it's a scary and thrilling time.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think we're out of time. It's been really a pleasure talking to you, David and Sophia. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and David. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Why don't you show us how you can find your way to your charger?
Sure.
Oh, there she goes. So yeah. All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.